Hey there, Star Wars fans. Chris Pitcher here, along with my good friends, Leo Byrne Janicek, and the return of Joe Townsel.
The long-awaited return, yes.
Thank
Welcome
you so
back,
much.
Joe.
Is it appropriate to do this for this show, or do I need to
Oh,
do
well,
something
why
else?
not? You know, hey, listen.
Why not? Come on.
We like to cross the aisle here at tonight. So,
We're very inclusive here.
yes, it is. So we probably should have named this Return of the Townsel. That would have been really good. You know.
I don't know, it'd be more like a horror movie than a sci-fi show, but
here we go, because the faithful are here. Angela Alverson says howdy.
Thank you,
Howdy,
Angela.
And you all will see Angela live, close and personal tomorrow night here on Trek Tonight.
All right.
Joining us tomorrow. And Keith Jacobson says, Joe Townsel, the real Joe Townsel, is in the house. Hi, Joe.
Yeah.
Hello, Keith.
Yeah. So how is everybody tonight? I know we've had some crazy weather, and I've got a sinus infection, and I don't have Landreau hair though tonight, which is good.
That's good.
Yeah, I had Landreau hair for a while. It was pretty bad.
Count your blessings.
Yeah, how you doing, Joe? We haven't seen you in a little bit.
It's been a while. It's great to be back on Trek Tonight, and I'm doing fine. And speaking of weird weather, I mean, if it's picking up on my mic a little bit here and there, I apologize, but we're getting some pretty heavy rain here in Kingman, Arizona.
Yes.
So we'll just have to pretend, like I said before the show to Chris, we just have to pretend it's rebel fire and it's for a good cause, you know?
Yeah.
And how are things in New York, Leo?
Not bad. Yesterday it snowed, but it was like it didn't really stick. At least not in the city.
Right.
You know, it was sort of pretty, but it wasn't heavy enough to really be. You know, it was sort of. This been. I mean, I say this as somebody who doesn't have to shovel a walk.
Right.
But I miss having snow in the city. Like I miss.
Oh yeah.
And Chris will back me up on this. In New York, when it snows, especially like if it snows at night, before it all gets, plowed up the next day.
Yeah.
There's kind of this quiet, beautiful quality to New York.
Yes. I remember when my wife at the time was pregnant with my first child, and it was snowing, and we'd been invited out to a little dinner party, and we trudged our way up the West Side. And I thought she was going to slip and go into labor, but we made it snow. But it was beautiful. It was exactly the way you described it. The city gets very quiet for some reason. I'm not really sure why. The snow.
I think a lot of people just stay indoors.
Well, maybe
that helps.
Yeah, it's almost like you're putting a deafening sound barrier up.
It's like a blanket of snow to tuck the city in,
as opposed to me with a blanket of phlegm.
Yes, well, it's sort of been very cold and damp in New York. Today was sort of windy. It wasn't, there's no rain, but the weather's been kind of cloudy. We haven't had a lot of sun.
Right, we haven't either down here. Yeah,
I'm sure everybody's very excited to hear my very vague weather report.
Oh, I know I am, and I can relate actually because people tend to think of Arizona as desert, which it largely is, but there's lots of snow in Arizona, and here in Kingman at about, I'm going to say it's about 2,500 elevation.
Oh, wow.
Right.
We do get it too. And last week we got almost 10 inches one night.
Wow.
Right.
So,
right.
But then it was melted away almost by the next day. So,
right.
Weird weather.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of meat on this bone to unpack for this episode of Mandalorian, The Convert. And, I've got to say, it sort of made me stop and think a little bit, which I guess maybe that was the purpose of it. But you have these bookends of Bo-Katan and Din Djarin, from where we last left our heroes, down in the mines of Mandalore, and then they try to get home, and then they get attacked by TIE fighters, and her castle gets blown up, and they end up back with his group of hardcore Mandalorians, and he proves that he was able to bathe in the waters and redeem himself. And as it is Creed, he is now Mandalorian again. So.
And so is Bo-Katan.
And so is Bo-Katan.
She
had to jump in after him.
She does feel a little bit like a lapsed Catholic who's sort of having second thoughts.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah,
a little bit. It's not a direct correlation, but just somebody who was very steeped in a culture and had sort of rejected the spiritual side of it, and now is sort of maybe reconsidering it because last week she saw the mythosaur,
right?
This kaiju-sized mythosaur down in the waters.
Right.
He didn't see it, and she was trying to be like, "You're seeing anything alive down there?" He's like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Never mind."
Never mind.
You know.
I'm nuts.
So.
Yeah.
It was very interesting to see the Mandalorian segment of this episode was actually fairly short. It was at the beginning and the end.
However, I read somewhere that this was the longest episode.
It was almost an hour. It was pretty long.
And for those of you who haven't seen the episode, go watch it and then come back and see it. We're going to talk all about all the nifty details. So if you don't want it spoiled for you, go look at it, come back. We'll be here.
Yeah.
But at any rate, it was interesting. So then you have this story in the middle, which is like a cross between Operation Paperclip after World War II, when the United States started to harvest all of the Nazi scientists, and sort of an Orwellian nightmare.
It was interesting. Apparently,
that's the way it hit me.
There was going to be a show called The Rangers of the New Republic that Cara Dune was supposed to be the lead of, but since the actress soured her relationship with Disney, she was let go. So they've decided to take some of that content rather than recast it or find a new lead. They're taking some of that content and folding it into The Mandalorian.
Right.
And it plays in because we see it was Dr. Pershing. Hal Pershing.
Yeah.
And we first see him. He's speaking at this opera house. It was the same one that Palpatine and Anakin sat watching that weird zero-G aqua ballet in episode 3. And he does this sort of public confessional where he's talking about, he regrets that what he was doing was being misused, but he has this very passionate plea talking about how he lost his mom when he was young and she was the guiding force for him. And we later find out that his mom was a doctor. And he really felt that cloning, that there are practical applications that could be thing. And everybody's like very
well, it really felt to me, and I don't know what you thought, Joe, but it felt to me like he was being dragged out by the state as an example of, what this, what was it called? What's the name of the program called, guys? Oh, Amnesty Program?
The Amnesty
Program. Right.
Amnesty Program. So
I totally agree, Chris.
The poster child for that.
Sure. I mean, I definitely picked up on the 1984 Orwellian vibes straight away. Before I answer your question further, I'll just make it clear that my experience thus far with The Mandalorian is having watched the first season, here and there, second season, and I jumped right into this third episode of the third season.
Oh, okay.
So there's a familiarity, a little bit more than I did with other projects we've talked about together. But given that, it played almost like an anthology episode, which I really kind of dug. I mean, I really like the main story, as it were. Of course, seeing the advancement of the Mandalorian and his colleagues was good too. But I really thought this was a very compelling story to tell within the Star Wars universe.
You definitely picked a good one, Joe, to jump
I think
in
so.
and seen anything else, because it was sort of its own primarily
self-contained.
a self-contained story. So,
Well, it's interesting because we know very little about the time after the Empire falls and the establishment of the New Republic. And it's interesting because all these sort of like society people who are like kind of like fawning over him and sort of patting themselves on the back, after his presentation.
right.
And then one guy's like, oh, they nearly drafted me. His wife said, well, that was the Empire, dear, not this. This is the Republic. Because, well, I can't keep these things straight. I just got to keep myself, which
like a real flop. Just yeah.
But what's interesting, it also reflects, in a way, that the original trilogy did not address the idea that this has there's a more realism to it. It's not just plucky heroes, mustache twirling villains, and it's the idea that there were people, rich people, who did nothing to oppose the Empire because they were fed and happy and fat, so they had nothing to worry about. It didn't matter who was running the government as long as their life was undisrupted.
How many?
Well, whichever way the wind blew, basically. Yeah. I mean, and that character, remind me a lot of Lando Calrissian in Empire.
Yeah,
and that hey, we're just over here doing our thing, just leave us alone.
Yeah. How many trillion people did they say live on Coruscant?
Oh Lord,
is it 30 or 3? It was like 30 trillion.
It was 3, but I could be wrong.
Maybe 3. I knew there was a 3 in there somewhere. I don't know. 3 trillion people.
What did you guys think of? Because we've always been told this is a planet that's the entire planet is a city.
Yeah.
Right.
And what did you think of that little bit where you get to see the only portion of the actual planet, that tiny peak that's the highest elevation?
I thought that was great.
It was.
I love that because it's like, imagine if like that city didn't exist, like this city, this planet-sized city, that would be like the top of Everest, you know, and they've just built up all around it. I just thought that was such a neat little moment because it's just gray rock. It's not like some special sci-fi crystal beautiful thing. It's a very bland gray rock.
Yeah,
but don't touch it.
But don't touch it.
I'm just saying that it is
and don't let it.
Compared to Coruscant, always looks like it's Oscar night.
Well, okay, so you know what I got out of this particular glimpse? They're walking around with their glowing popsicles, and you hear this ambient music playing in the background. I felt like I was at Disney World.
It was like a little festival area.
And there's this guy, pulling a chicken out of a hat or whatever he was doing, and children running
little
way.
Space dragon. You don't know what it is. Just
things that look like rides, that you could go in, or attractions.
Yeah.
It felt very Disney World to me. It felt very either Epcot or Tomorrowland or something.
Sure.
Yeah. Now, speaking of which, what was I going to ask? I had some questions here. I'm a little bit confused, though.
Okay.
Because, and I'm probably just getting my timelines jumbled, but for the sake of myself and the audience, perhaps, I don't really understand. You've got Coruscant and you've got the New Republic.
Yes.
And they've got shipyards where they're tearing down Star Destroyers and stuff.
Yes.
But then you also have the Mandalorian and Bo-Katan being chased by advanced TIE fighters.
Right.
Are they New Republic TIE fighters?
No.
Who do they belong to?
Okay. I'm going to go out on a limb and I think it's Moff Gideon, because when was it L-52 or Dr. Pershing meets with the other sort of amnesty crew, including Moff Gideon's old comm officer.
Right.
They Moff Gideon gets brought up, and then everybody's like, "Woof!" And one of them says, "I heard that he escaped, on his way to a tribunal."
Right.
And people are like, "Oh, that's just a story." They're saying, that they just took him out back and shot him. But I'm fairly certain that he escaped, because you don't hire an actor. Is it Giancarlo Esposito, if I'm getting his name correct?
Yeah.
You don't hire him to have him die off screen.
Right.
and he's a great villain. He was terrific. So I think that he is, especially since they attacked a Mando ship.
Keith says Empire warlords were referred to at one point.
Yes, and at least from the books, and the books are not 100% canonical until they cherry pick something out.
Right.
But the idea that there were areas that, that were under Imperial control, and somebody be like, well, I'm not just going to give up. I'm the warlord of, this sector.
Right.
And I've got a bunch of Star Destroyers, so go F yourself.
Right. Because even Moff Gideon, they were saying when they're sort of doing the breakdown of the complement of what's on his cruiser or destroyer or whatever. They say it used to hold these many troops, and it doesn't. Yeah. Although they did seem to have a fairly decent supply of stormtroopers. To throw at everybody, but
that's my guess that it's Moff Gideon going after, because I think you would like to get the Darksaber back.
Right. Right.
Possibly. We don't know 100%, but
okay. So we're in a period before the New Order groups itself.
Oh yeah.
And you just sort of have these commanders that still have access to gear and equipment that are sailing around like pirates. Okay, I got it.
My understanding is that the Mandalorian series takes place roughly 5 years after Return of the Jedi and 25 years prior to The Force Awakens.
Right.
And it would make sense. I mean, the little faction we saw this week of the more advanced TIE fighters could have been part of the beginning of the New Order that we see later, or could have just been a faction that just died out quickly, but it's obviously the seeds of what's to come in the third trilogy.
Right. Well, now, Keith, I'm going to read this, and then I'm going to comment on it. The whole 1984 vibe of the New Republic disturbed me a little. We were always led to believe that the New Republic were good guys, and here they are acting like the Empire with better PR. And I will say the same thing, Keith. I thought, wait a minute, these guys are, they're, first of all, they're taking away people's names and giving them numbers. Okay, that's your numerical. How did I describe it? Your numerical designation. Mm-hmm. I think the stormtroopers had numerical. There's Keith says it's dehumanizing, and there's a lot of dehumanizing there. Now, are they just dehumanizing the old Empire people?
That is my impression, because you've got a bunch of people who either gave up, either surrendered or got caught.
Right.
And I think they're trying, rather than just like executing the lot of them, which would be problematic for a lot of reasons, both morally and I would say logistically. Because I don't think they but they're trying to rehabilitate them.
But let's be real. Even after World War II, we didn't go and plant our troops and hold Germany and say, okay, Hans, now you're going to be L-53.
Well, no, they didn't. But they, we also didn't have. It's not. I don't think it's a black and white thing, but I think we're also seeing it is a fledgling government, and I'm not defending their thing, but even Pershing, they're not using him to his potential, but he has a, basically I felt like he was doing a job I was doing, which was like some data entry.
Yeah,
that's what I used to have.
Well, that little guy that rolls by with the cart, bringing him work and stuff, and he's kind of this sweet little, doofy guy, and he says to him, "Oh well, it's data entry, why the heck are you doing data entry, and that's a really good point, because one would think, just like what I mentioned earlier, Operation Paperclip, the idea that we said, okay, now there are these really great rocket scientists in Germany, and we want to go to the moon, so we're going to hire them, and we're going to try to turn their their PR story around, polish them up really good, and then have them build our Saturn V rockets.
Possibly, but I mean, there is also a real stigma with the Clone Wars.
Yes.
So, the New Republic has decided that cloning is sort of a
fair enough,
off the table scientific avenue.
But then it's very interesting that they chose to wheel him out like the poster child for the amnesty program, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, but he's also, they got him like doing data entry, so it's like I don't think it's clear, but they also, I mean, I'm not defending giving them numbers, but they also, unlike as these people say, it's like it's very different from the way the Empire would do. The Empire wouldn't put them all together,
Right.
if they capture a bunch of rebels, assuming they didn't just execute them. They would not, put a squad together and even send them to like a labor camp. They would probably split them up.
Well, let's look at Rogue One. You had that one guy who was the engineer who basically designed the Death Star.
Yeah.
They were forcing him to do it.
Yeah. So, but it's.
I thought some really compelling 1984 elements again were, I mean, I first started feeling uneasy when I saw the amnesty housing situation. I said, okay, well, we've rounded them up. We're going to, and the regular interviews by the one droid, which of course to me is the big brother aspect of the show, is, are you okay? Do you feel any animosity? Do you feel any resentment? Yeah. And one time he wants to kind of push the limit and they shoot him right down so he knows where the boundaries are for sure. And finally, the little bit of rebellion, as it were, touch the rock, haha. And then later on, I thought it was very poignant in a way when they introduced themselves with their real names.
Yeah.
Which of course made her betrayal that much more gut wrenching later on.
Right.
Right. It is very interesting because clearly she was working. She's like, there's a lot of questions. Like, is she doing this because she resents him? Is she taking orders from Moff Gideon, like, through a sort of a secret, communication system?
That was going to be my question for you guys, which was that what she did out of loyalty to the New Republic by testing him and seeing whether he would break and go back to his old ways, or was it part of some darker purpose to get rid of him?
It has to be some darker purpose because
I think so.
Because she didn't at the end when he's the mind flayer, which is an interesting choice of descriptor because that is a very unpleasant monster from Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
So they're doing like this low-key thing, and it's very, of course there's the whole bit where he's talking to a Mon Calamari. He says it was a trap, and it's sort of like this, like, that was the most famous Mon Calamari we know, Admiral Akbar. It's a trap.
It's a trap.
So
yeah,
I know I'm carrying cold on Newcastle. I'm sure anybody who's watching us and watched the show got that.
Right.
But she stays there. She's like, he was my friend, and even though he messed up, I want to. And they're like, no, please take all the time. And then she like ranks the thing up to like 11.
Right.
And, messes up. Now the question is this going to make him more compliant? Are they going to extricate him and use him for his knowledge? Or is this going to turn him to jelly?
Yeah.
But it also, I'll be honest, this is, I know this is a show about, spaceships and, magic babies and all sorts of other craziness.
Right.
But it does feel like somebody should be monitoring somebody going through a, sort of a mind altering procedure. It feels like, it's not like, it's not like it's not like he's he's going into a tanning bed where they're like, all right, that'll be a half hour. Somebody will, the alarm, when you hear the ding, open the thing and session's over. He's restrained. You think there would be somebody qualified there to monitor and make sure like it doesn't go tits up.
Well, but look what that happened to James Bond, right? He's in the spa, and he's going to get to, what is it, a steam or something inside this box, and then somebody ends up like trying to kill him with it. Or was it the machine? It was one of them.
There's
yeah.
It's. I mean, the thing is, like, James Bond wasn't like in a hospital there for like a minor procedure, and they just like, all right, they're like, all right, lads, want to go down to the pub for a quick pint, I just feel like medically, it's a little irresponsible to walk away from a patient in the middle of a procedure, even if it's a low risk minor procedure.
Right.
Then,
yeah.
I
mean,
well, would you trust yourself to a giant fish man? I wouldn't. Come on. That's a giant.
Well, he was more. I think that I almost feel like it's not as there's an Orwellian flavor to this, but I also feel like there's sort of that well-intentioned good guys. Like, they're trying to do the right thing. They're trying not to be like the Empire, but they're sort of like they're also not being as decisive as they need to be. There's a little
and
they're probably not focusing properly as well, because the one thing that tied the two parts of the story together to me were they're hyper focused on these ex-Empire servers that serve the Empire unwillingly and then with hesitation. Meanwhile, there's these other factions out there that just kind of are doing their own thing. And to me, that definitely lends itself to the theory that down the line, within a couple decades, those factions will eventually come together and form the First Order. And they probably, by and large, because the New Republic just wasn't paying enough attention to that aspect of what was going on in the galaxy.
It's I mean, I would even like any large government. I mean, and this is a government that is running, not just a city or a country, or even a planet, which would be, overwhelming enough to do. Being the mayor of any city in this country is probably, like a headache and a half, going exponentially, larger based on the size of the city. But they've got multiple, hundreds, maybe thousands of star systems that they are trying to make sure, trying to like attend to all their needs, but it's impossible because, you pay attention to one thing and you're pulling resources away from another thing, which is,
because they even say it's not just the Imperial fleet they're dismantling, but the Alliance fleet as well.
Yeah.
So they're chucking the rebel ships too at the same time. Doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well, the other thing that they didn't remember in history, way back in the New Hope, I mean, it was mentioned specifically there that the Senate was still intact because they needed it just to keep control.
Yeah,
they couldn't have all their fingers in the pot at one time.
But as Grand Moff Tarkin says, the regional governors will now rule instead.
There you go.
Well, that worked out well. But I mean, even the Empire, despite its very draconian methods, failed to control everything because, whether you are a well-intentioned New Republic or, a fascist, galactic empire, somebody's going to be unhappy no matter what. So it was interesting, but it's going back, like if we look at the original trilogy, and something I've mentioned before in this episode is it's very good guys and bad guys. There's not a lot. The greatest area we have is Han Solo, who is the rogue with a heart of gold,
right?
And it looks like he's gonna, he's like, I got to pay off these debts and blah blah blah, and Luke throws him a lot of shade over that. Look out of yourself, Han. I guess that's what you're good at, which is a typical 20-year-old thing to say. But there was not a lot of gray area. People were very much the archetypes of these sort of thing. And even, like Lando knew the Empire was bad, but he was just trying to keep him. He was trying to carve out a little section for himself. And he figured, like, if I play ball with the Empire, they'll leave us alone. But, when you give in, you give in to blackmail, essentially, they're going to just keep asking for more and more and more. So,
yep, good points. And as I say, I mean, the you can it was very interesting for me to see the seeds of some of that neglect that would spawn later into a new problem, you know, in the form of the First Order. Because, like I say, I mean, what position? I was always wondering, did the New Republic form into like an actual New Republic that was benign and a republic and a democracy, as Obi-Wan put it once? Did that happen immediately? Well, apparently it did not.
No.
And despite good intentions, it was very interesting to see that where they might have gone astray from the very beginnings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I have a question. I'd see what you guys thought. Did that Star Destroyer really look disabled to you?
It looked like they were taking it apart. Like it looked like it was sort of
certainly had power in it.
Well, you know, I mean, the difference between like supplying power to like a room and supplying power to like the engines or the shields or, you know, more.
If Kirk or Cisco showed up and said to either Scotty or O'Brien, "Can you get this thing moving?" They'd do it in an hour. So,
yeah. Well,
it reminded me of the partially constructed Death Star 2. That answers the question.
It just had a lot of lights on it when even when they walk up to it before she opens the door. And I liked one of the things I liked was the creaky door sound because it sounded like a battleship.
Yeah.
Opposed to a spaceship to me. It sounded like a big, massive, God only knows how many tons battleship. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Well, one thing that set Star Wars apart from Star Trek back in the day was that all the vessels, even the Empires, you know, did not reek of being dealership showroom new.
Yeah.
These things were used and abused and everything, something that Star Trek kind of adopted later, you know. So that continues with, you know, with this show, obviously.
Now, Keith is saying that the lights could be shore power.
Yeah, it could be. They might, you know, because people have to go in if they're dismantling it.
Right.
They have to have, you know, they might have to turn on like, you know, not so much life support, but, you know, like a place like that could get very hot and like the air could be stale.
Right.
Might be contaminated. So there's probably, it's probably plugged in so certain systems can be turned on so they can, you know, so people aren't just using flashlights like they did.
Makes sense. Keith said earlier that it's common, though, to disarm after a war, so disbanding much of the New Republic fleet would be typical.
If you remember also that before the Clone Wars, the Republic had no standing army or navy. Presumably, you know, systems had their own militaries to defend themselves against pirates or something like that. Right. And the Jedi did a lot of the other stuff, even though they wouldn't fight in wars, but they were peacekeepers. You know, so it's, you know, having the expense of having a standing military, especially one the size of either the Imperial Starfleet or a New Republic, you know, Navy, is got to be huge. You know, because you got to man everything.
And look, I'm going to go out on a limb here, which is why the last of the new movies was just so ridiculous.
Oh my God!
Because they had 8 billion ships all of a sudden, you know, or whatever it was, and it was just like, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but you're right. It's a lot to run all of that. I mean, I even thought to myself, you know, the resources it took to build all that stuff and the facilities that the Empire had to have in a relatively short time to build all that stuff is just amazing. I mean, just the idea of being able to build a space station the size of a planet.
Yeah.
It's
a fun point you bring up, Chris, because going back to New Hope, I mean, we see it wasn't even a Star Destroyer, it was a smaller vessel that took 10 minutes to fly overhead.
Yeah.
And then by the time we got to the Rise of Skywalker, there's like 500 of them all lined up in the sky.
Right. Yeah. I will say, and I don't think he's here tonight. I think he must be busy, but I remember seeing the movie Spaceballs with our dear friend Craig Lubin, and their version of the ship that just kept going and going and going. I will never forget how much Craig laughed.
Yeah, delighted him.
Yeah,
delighted
that just really just tickled his funny bone. So I'll say I'm looking to see if I have any other notes or points I wanted to bring.
We haven't really discussed the Mandalorian. We've discussed a little bit.
No, we haven't, and really, it's because it's almost like the two slices of bread just holding the sandwich together. But
yeah, this is like a Carnegie Deli sandwich.
So let's talk about that.
Ton of pastrami in between.
Just on a very superficial level, the dogfight above Bo-Katan's castle, which gets destroyed.
Right.
In that whole area. I mean, that was great. It was exciting. He like Mando jumps out and then has to like last minute like fire his jetpack to avoid smashing into the thing. But you see, he sort of stumbles a little when he lands. Like he doesn't land like, he doesn't do a superhero Iron Man pose. He sort of like slips a little because it's also wet because it's right by the sea and it was sort of raining. And I was like, I love it. That's one of the cool things about Din Djarin is he's very cool, but he's not like Teflon. Like we've seen him slip. We've seen him not be great at stuff. Not that he's ever like incompetent, but it's just like, these moments of sort of humanity for him, which I love.
Well, it's like we talked about in last week's show. We talked about the idea that the dark saber, it's not easy for him to control that.
No.
And you see the difference between when he's wielding it and then when Bo's wielding it.
Oh yeah.
There's definitely a difference. So yeah, he's not the perfect hero, but he's the hero we need. He's the great.
But that whole dogfight, it's funny because I always forget the name of this system they use when they shoot, because it's like a sound stage with this sort of circular these screens, and the idea that it looks like they're in a desert or they're on in a forest. It's remarkable because they all look so much like the outside, and I'm not sure what that was based on, that sort of that landscape. It was whether it was like Scandinavian or
I don't know. It is a cool looking planet though.
It is.
Yeah. And so are we to believe that that's the moon of Mandalore?
It's one of the moons of Mandalore, or a nearby. Yeah, I believe it's one of the moons of Mandalore. And it's like, I mean, as effed up as Mandalore is, and I'm hoping that they will eventually, fix things up there. It's going to be a lot of work.
Right.
But this moon seems pretty nice. I mean, there's like there are oceans which presumably have fish in it.
Right.
There's vegetation. There's probably clean water. It seems like a fairly unspoiled. I mean, I don't know if there's cities on that planet. We only got to see the lone castle there.
It feels pretty deserted.
It does.
Yeah.
But there's a big diaspora of Mandalorians across the galaxy. So,
Now, I'm sorry if I'm interrupting, but one thing I want before I forget, maybe I'm reaching here, but I thought the conclusion, I know it's roughly a conclusion to past episodes of the Mandalorian on his redemption arc in the eyes of the other Mandalorians in bathing in the waters, that whole bit of their culture really kind of foreshadowed to me what was coming later in the episode on Coruscant, which is of course the now maybe unintentionally but oppressive regime that is the New Republic. But it seems like the Mandalorians are handling it maybe a little bit better. There's a little bit there of finding yourself from within and coming back to grace. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, that particular group that you're seeing, they're kind of the zealots of the ones we've seen so far, because you had Bo-Katan had it, which you didn't see, I don't think, Joe. She had a whole gang of Mandalorians with her at one point, really recently, and half of them weren't wearing their helmets, and they were just shooting and blasting everything, and they were kind of like bounty hunters in a way, but people for hire. So yeah, it feels to me like that culture is very fractured, and
Yeah.
you get different pockets of it. So the pocket that Mandalorian is trying to ingratiate himself with, they're the real creed following hardcore guys.
Yeah, I just thought it was two very interesting takes on quote unquote glorious conformity. You know, how do you fit in and still live with yourself, basically?
Right.
It was, what was interesting also is sort of the unequivocal acceptance that Din and Bo got when it was proved that they bathed in the living waters. And she's like, I don't believe what you guys believe. They're like, well, you haven't taken your helmet off since then, right? And they're like, she's like, nope. And they're like, well, you're one of us now. And
until you do.
They're all like, everybody's like slapping each other on the shoulders and being hail fellow, well met.
Yeah.
Except for and I've forgotten the name of that character. He has a name, the big bruiser.
You mean the guy who sounds like Worf?
Yes.
Boy, does he sound like Worf. And I never noticed it until the new Picard series, where you now see Worf. But it was really funny. At one point, he says some line, and I'm watching it with Gina, and and all of a sudden I go, I am Worf, son of Morg, and just like right out of his mouth, But yeah, he's kind of an interesting character. I hope he learns.
Yeah, he's been there since the beginning.
Angela says, one of us.
Yeah. So it's interesting.
It's been a long time since I've watched that movie.
I've never actually seen it. It just
you haven't?
It just creeps me out.
Yeah. Called is it Freaks or what is it? What's
Freaks.
It called? Freaks. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
All those pinheads.
I've seen enough about it that I know what the deal is.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it gives me the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah. Well, that's that. One of us is a little different than what was it in Battlestar Galactica? So say we all.
So say we all.
Yeah.
Now I have a question for you guys. Having not seen all the episodes, seen quite a few, but
sure.
Is this a standout episode in the sense it was largely the Mandalorian part of the story was largely a bookend for a different story entirely? It seems like it's been about the Mandalorian pretty much the whole time.
Yeah,
it seemed like it was
unusual, Joe. This was unusual. That's why I said it was an interesting one for you to step into,
right?
Because it was predominantly its own separate story about characters we've seen.
Yeah, I knew they weren't brand new characters,
right? But the fact that it was dedicated to that story, with a little taste of the Mandalorian.
So, are we going to converge later in the season? Do you think?
I think so.
Yeah,
I don't think they're. I think that it is foreshadowing the return of Moff Gideon, who again, like I said, you don't hire that actor to have him like disappear and die off screen.
Right. Right. No, and you're right.
So
I didn't think he was gone. I mean,
I didn't think so either. But there's
disappointed if he'd been killed after a tribunal or something, and that's the last we saw of him. That'd be really stupid.
But there are rumors that he escaped. Before he got to the tribunal, and that sounds like something that would happen to him. That's so Moff Gideon.
You know where he is? He's in Argentina.
Yes, Space Argentina.
Space and Gina.
Hell, Gideon.
But I think it is building into the larger story, but it was a bold choice to spend the majority of an episode of a show called The Mandalorian not with the Mandalorian.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I know exactly. How did you feel about that, Leo? What did you guys, either or Joe too? I can't really ask Joe because he's stepping into it, so it was kind of like this is the norm for Joe. But you've been watching it all, Leo.
It's very different, but I always applaud like a different take, because sometimes you would be like, oh, as much as I love The Mandalorian and it's a great show, a lot of episodes feel like fetch quests, which if you play console or online RPGs where they're like, go to the mountains and kill 5 wolves and bring me back their pelts. There's a lot of like he needs a thing, so he has to go talk to somebody, and then they don't have it, but they direct him to the person who does have it, and that kind of so he does a lot of that stuff. So I thought it was a bold choice. I loved spending time on Coruscant because Coruscant always looked like is such a cool looking planet. We've seen a lot of it on Andor, but again, like this one, it just felt like Oscar night because everything's lit up and it's all beautiful. And especially, and the opera house, it feels like, there's a literally a red carpet, and you feel like
I love the opera house, seeing that again, and that was very cool. Because actually, it's interesting. You've seen glimpses of Coruscant in several different films and programs, and they all sort of look the same. Like it's such a huge friggin' city. It's got to be Coruscant. But each one of them has taken their own little design thing with it. So it was kind of cool to go back and see the opera house and see this version of it. I thought it was kind of neat.
And they're the sort of brutalist brick, architectural style of the, I keep forgetting the name of the
amnesty program.
The amnesty program. Yeah. Although I will say, it's pretty nice. Like he doesn't have to share an apartment with somebody. It's not like it's not like a big like gymnasium with a bunch of cots. Everybody has their own little. And while that would be a fairly substantial New York apartment for somebody.
The intergalactic YMCA.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, I was looking at that. I'm like, it's a little bland, but I'm like, it's not terrible.
Jen, it's felt imperial to me.
It might have been old imperial housing that they've converted.
It's the gray because everything, even the uniforms that they wear had the little square pins.
Yeah,
I mean,
and the belt with that buckle.
Right. It definitely. So either somebody is saying, like when he first walks up to that group and they're all sitting around having a drink.
Yeah.
And they say, "Oh, you're new," and it's because of the pins.
Yeah.
And he says, "Oh, those pins give it away," But it's almost as though somebody said, "Yes, we're going to integrate these imperial people back into our society, but we're going to make them dress sort of like they used to, so you know who they are."
Yeah, I don't think that's a mistake. No. I think
think about it. Yeah.
Like they're robbed of the threat of an imperial uniform.
Right.
That represents, but it also gives it it is like neutering the threat that, if you saw like an imperial officer walking down the street of the New Republic, everybody would flip out.
Right.
It's like wearing a Nazi uniform, going around the corner to the, to the bakery or the patisserie.
Yeah, I made that mistake once. Never do that again.
Well, and again, I mean, just the Orwellian aspects of it. I mean, one thing we haven't talked about much is, other than the plot, is his relationship with the woman.
Yes.
And I have to apologize for not remembering Winston Smith's girlfriend in 1984, her character name, but she ended up serving a purpose, whether she knew it or not. It was to test the limits, to see if he could be productive in their version of society, and if not, to break them.
Right.
And
exactly. It was in that regard.
And I'm sure she believed the character in here is that it was all for the good of the New Republic, and unfortunately for the good of the state almost in their approach.
That's my question. My question is, because there's two ways you could look at her. First of all, I want to say John Van Gostein. Hey, John, how you doing? John gave a thumbs up. I don't know if that was related to what we were talking about or just hi, how you doing, and enjoying the show. But that's my point. My point that I mentioned earlier is that there's two ways you could look at it. You could say, is she fanatically converted? Because the title is The Convert. That's the title of the episode. So is she fanatically converted to the New Republic, and she's remembers this guy from Moff Gideon's ship and is trying to see whether he's truly converted or not? And when he isn't, she thinks, well, he should die for it. Or is it that she's part of some other darker purpose?
I'm not sure. It feels. I think if she was really like a convert to the New Republic, she wouldn't have fucked with his the intensity of his treatment.
Maybe, yeah, she would have gotten him arrested, and then that'd been it.
Yeah, I think she's definitely serving a darker purpose. Well, to be honest, as soon as she showed up, I was like, I don't trust. I was immediately suspicious, because it's sort of like, like it for him. It's like reminded him of the terrible things he did.
Right.
So it has to be unnerving.
He basically was using Jedi blood to create force wielding Vermox, basically.
Or like the cloning.
I read this somewhere, and I'm not sure. I read it in another article, but the idea that that's what they were doing. They were trying to create super soldiers.
I think, and also the thing is partially because I think Palpatine, who was they're maybe looking to clone Palpatine, and I think because Palpatine, once he becomes Emperor, like how, scarred and messed up he is physically, I think he was looking to get himself a new body, so he could rule forever.
Maybe
so be it. Yeah.
Hey, maybe Palpatine's behind the scenes, pulling the strings of the puppets of the New Republic. Who knows?
Right. So that's who you think that Pershing is referring to when he says one man that ended up getting twisted into the needs of one man to serve a darker purpose. That's who he's talking about, is Palpatine.
Possibly, or Moff Gideon.
Gideon.
Again, we don't know enough about what Moff Gideon was trying to do.
Right.
Like he never monologued and gave us his grand plan.
Yeah, my money's on Moff Gideon, but because the whole acquiring of the child was his project.
Yeah.
So that's why I think it's after Palpatine's time, but I don't know.
Listen, there's a lot of
later.
lot of blank space on that page.
Yeah, Palpatine shows up later having fathered a child, which I find really disturbing.
Apparently that was like a clone thing, like
it would have to be,
or some kind of artificial insemination deal, because I think so. Yeah, it's. I
have a headless BB-8, by the way. I just found this on my desk. A headless BB-8.
Or the head of BB-8.
I don't know. Well, yeah, that's true. It's the head of BB-8. Yeah,
that could be very foreboding there, Chris.
It could be.
what's to come?
Hey guys, we yacked our way to 54 minutes after the hour. That's amazing. This flew by.
Well, it flew by. It's a very compelling episode. I mean,
it was.
Again, I more so than my experience with some of the Star Trek series we've talked about when I was kind of green coming in. I have some experience with The Mandalorian, again, the whole first season, and enough at least to know the overall construct. And I just wanted to make sure when I asked earlier, is there other episodes like this one I didn't see in maybe season 2? Apparently not.
No.
And so on that basis, I mean, this is a very compelling, and it seems like a setup. I hope it is, because I'd hate to leave it where it left off with no further.
I'm going to assume that we're going to pick up this thread.
Yeah,
just like a one-off that leave you thinking, because I do think part of it was a little bit of a commentary on politics.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But not by beating your head over with it, which I really appreciated. It was told well within the constructs of the scenario and the situation and the plot.
Did you guys ever read that George Lucas kept trying to convince people that the original Star Wars arc was a comment on the Vietnam War? I never got that.
I never heard that specifically. I mean,
I read that
a lot. I wouldn't be surprised, I guess, but
I read that in an article too.
Yeah.
I mean, the closer we came was the Battle of Endor, which had a little that entrenched native population. But and again, this is well known within nerd circles. Is originally it was supposed to be on Kashyyyk, the Wookiee homeworld.
Right.
And I would have given, real American dollars to see like an army of Wookiees like tearing apart stormtroopers.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. Why did they choose not to do that?
I
Merchandising.
feel like they thought that the Ewoks would be cuter. I don't know. It's like it, and they are. I mean, Ewok it's a teddy bear. It's like teddy bears, who, and there's also a question like, did they just like kill stormtroopers and eat them? Because that feels like something they might have done.
Right.
So they're maybe not as cute as we'd like to think.
One of my kids asked me if Wookiees were meat eaters or vegetarians.
Oh, they're meat eaters. I mean,
I thought.
Well, they just
you remember Chewbacca went
porg, right? In The Last Jedi.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Had himself a little picnic there.
Yeah.
And if you remember, also in Return of the Jedi, where like they hung out some raw meat, and Chewbacca's like,
yeah, right,
hungry.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. Well, again, that plays into what you said last week, I think, Leo, where you said something about don't worry, we're gonna stop and get burgers. But yeah. Any other thoughts on this before we start to wind our way down?
It's interesting because unlike, as I said before, unlike the first two seasons, which had sort of a clear story.
Right.
The first one was about keeping the kids safe,
right,
and trying to stay ahead of the bounty hunters. Everybody was coming after him.
Right.
And the second season was about bringing the kid to, his people, which, as it turns out, are Jedi and not whatever race Grogu and Yoda and Yaddle. Lest we forget Yaddle. So this one, my feeling is partially is it going to be about the restoration of Mandalore, about sort of bringing Mandalorians back to Mandalore and maybe rebuilding their society. But there's also, the threat of Moff Gideon looming.
Right.
So it's interesting, and apparently they've said, unlike Ted Lasso or Picard, this is not limited to 3 seasons.
Right.
They're going to keep doing these as long as they want.
Yeah, I
heard no reports of them.
I really do. Hey,
actually, my question, it occurred to me was that, I'm not aware specifically of any upcoming Star Wars series on Disney Plus, but could this possibly be the seeds of a spinoff? Will they take
There's
this?
Something called the Skeleton Crew coming up. I don't know anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I don't think anybody does outside of Disney Studios.
Well, and there was supposed to be a series, and now I've forgotten what it's called or was supposed to be called, but with the character from season 1 and 2, the Marshal or whatever she was.
Oh yeah, Cara Dune. It's going to be Rangers of the New Republic, but
Rangers of the New Republic.
But there's also going to be an Ahsoka Tano show.
Yes.
Who first appeared in the animated Clone Wars.
Yeah.
She's a real fan favorite, and she's an excellent character.
Right.
So
I wish I liked that the look of those aliens better.
I don't mind.
Weird.
I mean, Star Wars aliens. I mean, are as it's just because I was watching. Somebody was their forehead was a little creased, like they were smiling or frowning, and I'm like, for a moment, I was like, is it like does somebody have a head loaf? I'm like, no, because that's exclusively a Star Trek conceit, the head loaf.
Hey, Keith comes in. Jumping back to talking about the Wookiees versus the Ewoks, and he says, I heard somewhere that the final fight was supposed to be a non-technological group beating the Empire, but by the time, sorry, I'm stumbling here, of Return, meaning Return of the Jedi, the Wookiees through Chewbacca were technologically advanced.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It seems as good a reason as any.
Yeah.
And again, the idea that they had to cram as much cute stuff in there because they wanted to sell it.
I mean, listen, it's Return of the Jedi is not my favorite of the original trilogy,
Right.
but it is a lot better than the Star Wars Holiday Special.
That's saying a whole lot, Leo.
Yeah.
The bar being awfully low on that.
But at least the Holiday Special gave us for the first time Boba Fett. That was the one good aspect.
Yes.
Yeah. And was it Chewbacca's son?
Lumpy.
Lumpy, yes.
Named after the guy in Leave It to Beaver, apparently.
Hey, I was at my local comic store, which is called The Comic Shop here in North Wilmington off of Marsh Road. And they actually had, now it's not in the packaging, so they're only charging like $50 for it or something. But they had that first run of Boba Fett action figure that you and I always talk about.
Oh yeah.
That real bright colored one that's
yeah.
lavender with red and green and yeah. They have a version of him looks in pretty good shape, but I do not think I'm going to spend $50 on it.
But it wasn't mint in box though, unfortunately.
No, it wasn't. It was just one of the loose figures. And to be honest with you, all of my Star Wars figures, especially from that time period, are loose. And I think I have one Stormtrooper that has a dog chewed leg.
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember that one.
Yeah. For some reason, I think everybody had a dog chewed Stormtrooper. I don't know why. That doesn't seem to be an uncommon thing. But
some kind of huge canine monster on an alien planet to detect the Stormtrooper.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
It's an early draft of the Mythosaur.
Yeah, I can't think of the name of it now.
Looked like a Cocker Spaniel.
Cocker Spaniel version of the Rancor. Yeah.
Yes.
No, but I mean, I have to say, one thing I found profoundly disappointing in the in episode 3 was the fall of Anakin Skywalker. I thought was pretty lame at the time, probably still do.
Right.
This by contrast, what we saw this week gives us a believable yet still action-packed and compelling theory about what might be going on with the New Republic at this point in Star Wars history.
Well, Joe, did you watch the last episode of season 2?
Yes, I did. I made a point because I knew that Luke was, spoilers, Luke was at the end.
Right. Right. And that but actually the interesting thing was the first episode of this season really dovetails to the end of the book of Boba Fett.
Okay, and I started that and I didn't get back to it, so I got some gaps to fill.
The last 3 episodes are the last it's the 7th and 8th episode are basically episodes of The Mandalorian because it's all about the Mandalorian.
Yeah,
and then the last sort of wraps everything up.
And that's actually where Grogu is reunited with the Mandalorian.
Right, I picked that up
at the tail end of that during the big battle. So so I was told go watch that one because that's really the one to get you up to speed to the beginning of this season. But
duly noted, sirs.
Yes. At any rate, and that was a little thought for discussion. I mean, we've already gone over by 4 minutes, so we won't do it this week. But put some thought to this. Would you guys watch a series with the actor that played Luke Skywalker at the end of last season and the actor that played the young Han Solo in Solo, a Star Wars story?
I'm one of the few people who really enjoyed Solo.
Me too.
Because to me, it was a Star Wars film. It had space action, had blaster fights, had crazy aliens and chases and heists, and
Yeah, I liked it. And I actually thought that, now I don't know his name because I didn't write it down, but I thought the actor who played Han Solo did a great job of doing a young version of Harrison Ford's version of the character. So, at any rate, I don't know. That would be interesting, don't you think, to see a series where you got to see that middle period where you got to see what Han and Luke and Leia were all doing.
It would be interesting. I would also like to see, because they kept talking about doing a Lando show with Donald Glover, who was so good as Lando.
Yes, he was very
Solo.
No, like both of you, I enjoyed Solo quite a bit, and personally, I mean, I don't. You're not asking for this comparison, but when it comes to de-aging, which to me is still a pretty imperfect thing, I'd much rather see a good recasting. I have no problem whatsoever suspending my disbelief it's a different actor.
Right. I mean, at the end of last season for Mandalorian, they wanted to have the distinctive sound of timbre of his voice, so I think he did the dubbing, right? I mean, Mark Hamill.
Yeah, it was a bit of a deep fake. For the end of the last season of The Mandalorian.
Yeah, but
it was fun because in that context, that's what you want to see. You know, this is a special surprise in The Mandalorian. But in terms of what you're saying, Chris and Leo, about some kind of miniseries or ongoing or whatever between using the younger actors, I'd be all for it as long as again it all comes down to performance and characterization and writing, direction, whatever.
Yeah,
I love that. Yeah, I love that when they're waiting for the super troopers to burst through the walls and the door, and all of a sudden they get a ship is showing up. Oh, one X-wing. Good, we're saved. It was just really sarcastic, like, oh, good, one X-wing. Anyway, I guess we probably should get rolling out of here. Before I do, I stole this from my grandson. Look at this. This is the new. This is the new kind of Star Wars. This is like a Micro Machines kind of scale Star Wars, and I showed this to the guys before in the green room. You open that up, and it's got he's got Luke. I mean, he's got Han and Chewbacca and Princess Leia, and then for some reason the X-wing fighter Luke is in there. I don't know why, but it's
I like to see the X-wings in the shop, and he's getting a lift.
Maybe that. Yeah, it does. It does. The back end does light up. Yeah, creates Caesars.
That's awesome.
And then you can open it. Right, and then in there's all the goodies. Here's the little chess table, and the guys asked me. Actually, I'm gonna see if I can get it. They actually does have the storage compartments for hiding people.
Nice. The
people will fit in there. And then on the bottom of it, you can wait a minute, let me get this back on there. You can open up, you drop the landing gear and open up the little gangway.
Nice.
So it's pretty detailed, and I think this was probably about $25.
That's a good price for something like that.
I thought so. He lost the gun. There's only one gun on the top that does anything, but you can put a guy in there, and then there is normally a gun on the top that goes on.
Right.
Well, I guess Vader shot it off or whatever.
I don't know, but yeah,
one connection.
So if you're thinking about, I like what's out there now, that's out there now.
All right, thanks for sharing.
So sure, I would have been able to share the X-wing fighter that Luke Skywalker came from, but the Dachshund destroyed it. So, again,
those darn killer dogs, man.
Dogs do not like Star Wars,
and they're battled with the canine. Yeah. So,
if I may share a short anecdote, it's unfortunately it's with our other favorite franchise, but I had a buddy back when I was in junior high, and I don't know where we got the money to do this at the time, but we went out and bought each. I bought, I think it was 5 Enterprise models,
right?
And he bought 5 Klingon models.
Okay.
And we haphazardly glued them together because our ultimate goal was not to keep them, but to basically just throw them against each other in battle. We destroyed them all just by at the ultimate Klingon Federation battle that day.
There you go. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Nobody wins a confrontation.
Nobody wins a conflict like that.
No, they don't. They really don't. All right, gents. We will be here tomorrow night with Angela Alverson, who will be here to talk about the next episode in Picard, which I'm very excited for. And then we'll be back here next week on Wednesday again, same time, 8 p.m. For our next episode of Mandalorian, and so on and so forth. This keeps rolling down the line.
All right.
Lots of great stuff out there to talk about.
Yeah, Joe, are you going to be here next week?
I can't next week. Let's talk about 2 weeks.
Okay, fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, very good.
Very much in demand, our Joe Townsel.
Well, I appreciate that, and of course, I'm thrilled to appear with everybody, and love hearing from our friends, in comment land. So thanks again, guys, for having me on tonight.
Yeah. Okay, Angela says bye, guys. She hung in there for that extra 11 minutes. Oh my God, we're really over.
God bless her.
All right. God bless you. All right, gents. Here we go. In the first interview.
Always.